Welcome to Inside Eugene. I'm your host, Marin Stewart. Each episode, we take you behind the scenes of library, recreation, and cultural services to meet the people and programs that make the Eugene, Oregon community shine. This time on Inside Eugene, we're joined by Eugene Public Library Director Angela Ocana. With Banned Books Week around the corner and back-to-school season in full swing, we're diving into the role libraries play in protecting the right to read, supporting students and families, and adapting to a changing world. Angela brings both insight and experience to this conversation about what's at stake and what's possible when communities stand up for intellectual freedom. Welcome, Angela.
Hi, Marin.
So first of all, why don't we start with your story? What inspired you to become a librarian?
I have had a love of reading my entire life, which is what I think all librarians say. Both of my grandmas were really invested in me learning to read, and so they would provide me tons and tons of books. But actually, I worked in the library as my first job when I was 16 years old, shelving books. And I thought that being a librarian was the most boring thing you could ever be. I was like, wow, that doesn't seem like fun. I'm just going to do this job while I go to college. It'll be fine. And then I ended up working for that library for 20 years and becoming a librarian, and in part because I met these amazing women who were these like new and upcoming librarians who wore stompy boots and fishnet stockings and had tattoos. And they were like, did you know that the library can be anything you want it to be? And here we fight for access and we fight for people and we make sure that every book you've ever wanted to read is here because it's important. And they just kind of had this like fist in the air, we're going to do it for our community. And I was like, whoa, I want to be a librarian. And so that's kind of how I went from not being interested in librarianship, but being around it my entire life to where I am today.
That's awesome. Very cool. So it's been a long process since teenager.
Yes. I've never not worked in a library. I think this is my 28th year in libraries.
Wow. That's awesome. So what drew you to Eugene specifically, and what makes our library system unique?
Wow. Well, it's a tale as old as time. I moved because I was in love with somebody. What I have come to appreciate so much about this library system is the community. Like, the community is amazing. Like, people turn out and they show up and they give their time and their energy. Yes, they give money and that's always great, but actually getting somebody to get off their couch and come to the book sale or come to volunteer or to raise a sign for the levee, like, this community just, I'm so awestruck all the time about everything that people care about here. And so it's really wonderful. Like, I didn't think it was going to be as amazing as it was. And I'm so excited to like live and work in this community.
Yeah. And so what do you find, what values or services seem to matter most to the Eugene community specifically?
One, it's a care. Like, it's a care for folks who have less than they do. It's an understanding of where privilege can come from and an understanding not everybody knows where everything is in terms of like scope of where equity and diversity and inclusion are involved, but people are willing to learn and move forward. It's this care and concern for kids having access and the patience, one would say, to deal with teenagers and how much folks really care about what youth are doing in our community. But more than that, I think it's this ability to love reading and knowledge and this like last bastion of democracy that should be fought for and held closely. And I see that all of the time. So that's something that I try and live my own values with this sense of how do we have access for all? How do we keep fighting for marginalized communities who don't show up at the table? How do we break down systemic issues of racism and classism and capitalism? And how do we provide this society that kind of the library is based on, which is a sharing economy that we give back to one another. You put a book back on the shelf because your neighbor is going to read it. And so that's kind of what I see the direction of the Eugene Public Library is. How can we become an even better window and mirror into the community? How can we make it so that you come in and you leave with a smile no matter what's going on in the world? And then how can we introduce you into something so unique and different at the library? You're like, whoa, that's at a library? I think it just speaks to our creative and innovative soul that we have here. Everybody just needs in their life, they need libraries. And so that's kind of what I see in our community and the values that I live with.
Absolutely. That's how I feel about so many of the library of things. I'm like, oh, wow, I had no idea the library would lend something like that. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so Banned Books Week is coming up. Can you talk about the national conversation around censorship and talk to your own work on this issue?
Yes. Well, just my own work is very minuscule in the great scheme of things that are going on and the amazing people who are fighting the good fight. So I sit on the Intellectual Freedom Roundtable. I was the chair, the past chair, and now I just get to help out, which is a delight. So it's a lot of work. But through that is this amazing process over the last, I would say, 8 years that I've been on that committee, is digging down deep into what does it mean around the freedom to read? What is that? How does that really impact us? And I think people usually think about book bans and challenges. And, I've talked a lot about how most people in Eugene don't think that that happens at their library, but it actually does. It's not always the most covert, somebody's stealing books or they're burning them or they're challenging them at your library. Sometimes it's as much as people hiding books, flipping over magazines with cover images they don't approve of, leaving really terrible notes in books about how people should behave. And there's this kind of insidious underbelly that still exists throughout. And I think that happens when we're afraid of change and afraid of where the world is going. But nationally, what I really am fascinated about is a couple of cases. Now, this might turn off your entire audience, so I apologize. I'm going to get real nerdy. This is kind of the things that I find interesting when we look at the national discourse, and certainly as politics has become more and more in our lives, there are some cases that have come out in the last few years that are really important to be watching. The first one is the Fifth Circuit Court decision. So the Fifth Circuit Court oversees Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, and that's Little versus Llano County. And this court decision happened because the library in Llano, Texas, removed 17 books out of their library. They were mostly LGBT books. The things that we notice is that queer books and books written by people of color are often the most challenged. And so the judge in the case ruled that those books should be returned. Great. End of the story. No, because the decision on appeal was actually made, and this is the fascinating stuff, is that libraries actually aren't bastions for the First Amendment. You are not actually allowed to read what you want. The Fifth Circuit Court deemed that that was actually government speech, and government speech can be censored. And if government speech can be censored, it means we actually don't need to put those books into the library. And so this overturn of the law is what sent all of the librarians into a tizzy, because it's basically breaking down precedent that happened through PICO case law. PICO is a really fascinating case study, and I'll tell you more about that one. But the other one that happened a year before this is Arkansas's Act 372. And in 372, what happened here is that in Arkansas, they put a law on that said that librarians could go to jail. Booksellers could go to jail. You were basically porn sellers. And so if you sold queer books, if you decided to put them in your library and they were accessible to children, you're now selling pornographic material to children. And this was the first instance of librarians being held accountable to pornography type laws. And this law was eventually overturned, but it's now also working its way through the appeal process. And both of these case laws inherently are talking about, so when Arkansas was overturned, the rationale was, well, First Amendment protects rights. There's different laws for obscenity that aren't included within this. And so how do you have two different jurisdictions making two different decisions that, because they're in different jurisdictions, they don't rely on each other, but it creates an interesting tension point between the two, which is, how can First Amendment rights protect librarians, but also then libraries are government speech and not First Amendment bastion? So actually, what is the law? And so it's creating these points that will have to be determined by the Supreme Court, which notoriously over the last couple of years has been really wonky in how it's been making its decisions. So it's this national view of, well, what are libraries? Are they a place that celebrates the First Amendment and that you can read and have access to things that you want, with librarians who are asked to put aside any sort of biases they have and to actually purchase collections and materials that maybe they don't even agree with because it's actually just somebody else's interest area? Or is it government speech, which can be regulated by the government? So these two case laws have been going on for a while, and Pico is actually the original arbiter of this case. And Pico is one of those that I find really, really interesting because it was started by high school students. And so Steve Pico and the other high school students, this is in New York, in 1976, they had books removed from their school. And this is like the power of youth, right? They're like, I don't think so. You can't remove these books. So Slaughterhouse-Five, Go Ask Alice, Best Short Stories by Negro Writers, and Soul on Ice. And the reason that the board said that they had to remove these was they were anti-American, they were anti-Christian, they were anti-Semitic, and they were just plain filthy.
Oh my God.
So their claim around this was the board was violating their First Amendment rights. And so the takeaway from that is that the ideology of the books was not the reason that you could ban those books. And so Pico has stood for like the last 50 years on this level of like, hey, you can't be removing something based on somebody's gender identity, right? Based on somebody's race. And yet since, 2019, we've seen this exponential increase in the amount of book bannings. We're talking about levels we've never seen, triple, 4 times, 5 times the level. The American Library Association started tracking in like 1995 the most banned books. And I think we're at 2,500 in a year, right? Like folks are saying like, absolutely not. And we're not being quiet about it anymore. So anytime you see the top 10 list, it is rare if a book is not written with some sort of aspect of queerness or by or about people of color. And so you're saying the really quiet parts out loud of why you don't want that book, which is in direct opposition to Pico. And so I find these two case laws very fascinating because as the Supreme Court decides to look at it, what will the decision they make and how will that affect every single library in the nation?
Mm-hmm. Sorry, that was like so much. No, I appreciate you making those distinctions and bringing up specific cases. Is it the most librarian thing to be like, wait, let me refer to the case law that I've written down here so that I can tell you about like, yeah,
how exciting it is.
What's at stake when we talk about the right to read freely and who is most impacted by book bans?
Everyone is affected by book bans because you don't notice the slow slippage of people taking your rights away. And it happens a little over here, and a little over here. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is really affecting me. And so even though I would make the connection that anybody who uses a library who doesn't have the financial means to purchase books and depends on their local library for materials, for education, anything like that are really impacted. And also, even if you are financially stable, you're well off, you live comfortably, you buy your books on Amazon, you visit Hodgepodge or the Romantasy bookstore in Eugene, right? The problem is that legislation that affects libraries doesn't always just affect libraries. It affects publishers and what they're producing. And so the more that the government intervenes in telling libraries and schools and publishers who are all the same but different what they can and can't do, you will end up seeing a shift in what is available to you. And all of a sudden you'll be like, whoa, what happened to the books I really like? But you hadn't seen the trend of the last 20 years of chipping away at our, what would say the constitutional rights, like the freedom to read should be that everybody should read a thing if they want to. And if you don't want to read it, then it's not for you. But you shouldn't have the right to tell another family what they can read, just like that family shouldn't be able to tell you what you can read. And so that's where I think that book bannings, challenges, legislation, it affects everybody, and we need to protect our rights to read.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any specific books that have been challenged or banned that you think everyone should read?
Books are challenged for a number of reasons. That being said, there's tons of books that you probably read and love that at some time somebody had an issue with and they were like, I don't like this book. But some of my standout favorites for me are obviously To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. It was at Holt, I think about a year ago, which was really awesome. And we talked about it at the library. The most controversial book of the last 3 or 4 years is Genderqueer by Maya Kobe. And I would say that book is not for everybody, but if you really want to read about kind of what the queer trans experience is, you should read it. It may make you uncomfortable. Like, it's a book that's that's meant to share one person's lived experience. And I think that's what's really hard is this book has been challenged so often, but what it's really talking about is somebody's lived experience, right? And when we challenge that, we don't say, hey, that's not right for that age group. We don't mention that it's like, yeah, but that's what that teenager was going through, right? And therefore, it's a book about the teenage experience. It's not overblown. It's like, these are things, right? This is what I was going through. And then they grow up and you're like, here's what I continue to deal with as an adult. And that same book can give kids going through the same experience some sort of light in the darkness to say, I'm not alone. Another one of my favorites is by Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds. They wrote Stamped: Racism and Anti-Racism and You. And they also do a version for teens and for kids. And it's an amazing book that goes through the history of racism. I think especially as a nation, when we're talking about whether or not we're pulling the history of slavery out of education or we're downplaying that it wasn't terrible, and then the lasting effects that led to our country's issues around racism and segregation and redlining. So it's a great pickup and a wonderful read. One of my favorites is The Giver by Lois Lowry, right? Absolutely challenged. One of the things I find funny, I didn't actually read Judy Blume, but much like genderqueer, Judy Blume was absolutely challenged and banned in the 90s. She wrote a book called Forever. It was about sex and teenagers, and people were not having it. And this is really before young adult, the category really blew up. So people were like, what is this book? And I just love this idea that like Judy Blume is like a badass getting banned. So those are some of my recommendations that if go pick a banned book out.
I love that you highlighted that this is, people need to realize, even if you don't relate to it, these are people's lived experiences. And it's unfortunate that our lived experiences are being banned.
Yeah, they're the thing that we say, like, actually, I don't love that you had that lived experience. Right. And that person might be like, I also didn't love that I had that lived experience. I wish it was different. And I want to make it different for somebody else who finds something. And so, yeah, it just kind of sucks because we're not attacking the books, we're attacking the people now.
Right. We're not thinking that this story could support somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So shifting gears a little bit, it's back to school season. So what should students, parents, and teachers know about any particular library resources right now?
Okay, number one, you have to get your library card. So if you are listening to this and you don't live within the tax-paying district of Eugene, or you've never gotten your kids or yourself a library card, all kids who attend a 4J, a Bethel school, homeschoolers through Lane Community College, as well as charter schools are all eligible to get library cards. If you go to a charter school, you should check with your administrator to see if your school qualifies for it. So that's step one, get a library card, be awesome. Step two, you can come to the library, which is exciting. We are the best place to find your OBOB books. We make a really concerted effort to try and have as many OBOB books as humanly possible. It is the largest amount of books I've ever seen in my life. It's great. We also put those books, we order extra copies on Libby, our online platform that you can check out. And so we have a wonderful selector whose passion is OBOB books. The other thing you could do if you aren't coming into the library is our online platform has a lot of resources. All of the information is verified. It links either back to secure sources or to encyclopedias, things like that. And also, one fun fact that people may not know is that you can get personally curated book recommendations. It's called What to Read Next. It's a form on our website. And you can say, like, my kid loves Diary of a Wimpy Kid. What do you have that's like this? Or they've outgrown this series, but they really loved it. It's amazing. Our librarians work really hard to get you a diverse collection of materials for whatever you're looking for. And then number two is Brainfuse, which is tutoring, but it's online tutoring. But it's actually really interesting because you pop on and then in like a little chat window, somebody says, hi, can I help you? And you can upload math formulas and they'll do it with you and they'll explain to you like, this is how this works. This is how this works. They'll help you edit papers. They'll give you feedback on like what you could do differently. Like, hey, I think you should explain this situation, or hey, I noticed that we missed this entire section on XYZ thing. And so Brainfuse is also a really cool way to get online tutoring live, which just feels weird, but also the internet is a magical place, maybe.
Yeah, that's amazing. I wish I had that as a kid. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's really neato. But also, if you don't have kids, you can come up to the second floor. We have the new Emerald Room. We have knitting circle going on. We have tons of crafts. We have our conversation clubs. Like, there's lots of things that you can do even if you don't have back to school kids. Just come to the library, take a break, check out some books.
Looking ahead, what changes or challenges do you see on the horizon generally, and how can the community support the library's future?
One of the things that I worry on, like if I put on my like big kid director hat and I think about the things that keep me up at night, I worry about funding for city municipalities. Certainly as we see changes at the federal level, like the Eugene Public Library doesn't have a lot of investment in federal dollars. We get a state grant, but that state grant is funded by the state and they don't actually allocate federal dollars to that specific grant. But the thing that's really hard is that other federal dollar changes that affect other parts of the city puts more pressure on the general fund, which is where the library gets all of its money, as well as a really awesome levy. Go levy, super love it. But us, as well as other municipalities all across Oregon, are having to make really hard choices. And I'm biased. I feel like the library is a must-have. It's not a would be nice to. It's not a get to. It's a must.
Wait, you like the library?
Surprise. Spoilers for the end of this podcast. It's a pro-library podcast. We've tricked you. But I worry about things coming down the line that affect us in ways that you don't think. We're currently giving a bit of a facelift thanks to our friends of the library on our entryway. And we've been planning that for a number of years, but construction costs have gone up. And so you're looking at this municipality that, like, for us, we're not interested in raising tons of money from people. Like, the people who need our library system the most, that's why we don't have fines. We need to ensure that we're not taxing the people who are least able, and we're making a resource that's free to everybody to access. But that always comes from the idea that means we still need to put books on the shelf, which means we need money. And so those are the things that worry me. Access to libraries might go away, either from federal legislation about what books we put in, or from the fact that the dollars go away and we have to prioritize and we get unprioritized.
Anything else that you want to share, either about Banned Books Week, back to school, library generally? Leave us on a happy note.
Again, I think it really circles back to our community cares about the library. They care so much. And that actually just fills my heart with so much joy to see people in the community care about their library.
Awesome. I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Angela. This has been super insightful and I really appreciate you.
Hey, thanks for having me.